fundamental pillar of political systems. But they, at the same time, support leaders who bypass the fundamental rules of the democratic process. And more than half of those polled express support for such leaders. So if you go around the world looking at Turkey, looking at Hungary, looking at Russia or China, looking all around us, we find leaders who are by very nature dictatorial, having popular support and getting elected through the electoral process. So this is the disturbing trend that this report talks of. The second important report that we need to look at is the Social Progress Index. And this again is something that is published year after year. And this report asks three questions. Does a country provide for its people's most essential needs? Second, are the building blocks in place for individuals and communities to enhance and sustain well-being? And three, is there opportunity for all individuals to reach their full potential? So in terms of the Social Progress Index in 2024, India would rank only 111 out of 170 countries with an overall score of 58.06. It had slipped 4 ranks from where it stood last year. Child stunting, sanitation, hygiene, press freedom are all areas in which India has taken a beating. The last report I'd like to refer to, actually I'd say last but one, is the World Happiness Report. India again ranked 126 out of 140 countries behind Libya, Iraq, Palestine and Niger. Older adults with secondary or higher education and those of the dominant social castes report higher life satisfaction than their counterparts without formal education and those from the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. The last report I would like to refer to is the Freedom in the World Report of 2024. And there it notes that in just 2023, political rights and civil liberties were diminished in 52 countries, while only 21 countries made improvements. One major reason was flawed elections and increase in armed conflict. Manipulation of elections, this report points out, was one of the leading causes for the global decline in freedom in 2023, driving down the scores in 26 countries. Not only was electoral manipulation widespread, but it also took on a wide array of forms. Among these forms in which you manipulate elections is attempting to alter the outcome of an election after voting has taken place, and this, the report rightly notes, discredits the democratic process by underscoring that voters do not in fact have a say in who governs them. Many of us in this audience will identify many of these problems that is now emerging worldwide. It's not peculiar to India, but it is a problem that we have to contend with. And that is what brings me to the importance of the civil society groups which are engaged in India for many, many decades now in defending our civil liberties. I want to start a bit earlier than the emergency, although we'd like to believe that the real activity around civil liberties among civil society groups took place around the emergency. No doubt the excesses of the emergency was a major catalyst in this direction. But our civil society activities date back more than a century. In the 19th century, we've had many social reform movements that responded to caste and class inequalities. This included the Brahmo Samaj and its offshoot, the Arya Samaj movement, later the Theosophical Society, with the avowed object of resisting and demanding abolition of child marriages. You would recall the work of Rajaram Mohan Roy. These movements built the momentum resulting in a law abolishing child marriages being passed in 1929. In the pre-independence era, we saw Vaikom Satyagraha led by Sri Narayana Guru in Kerala, E.V. Ramaswamy Periyar, and the Mahad Satyagraha led by Baba Saheb Ambedkar, which led to the passing of a law permitting temple retreat to all castes. We saw political movements like the Champaran movement, the civil disobedience movement, the Salt Satyagraha, with all led by Mahatma Gandhi, which had a deep impact on raising social consciousness and catalyzing the growth of the freedom struggle. On a lighter note, I think if Mahatma Gandhi were to apply for permission to the police commissioner in Delhi, asking for a march, he would be stopped right out the border somewhere beyond Noida or Ghaziabad and not allowed to enter. These movements also inspired struggles for freedom elsewhere in the world. Many movements had an impact on how laws were made, enforced, and how courts decided cases. After independence, we had the launch of the Bhudan and Gramdan movements of Acharya Vinobha, in which many participated and donated large tracts of land with the above object of redistribution among the landless. This inspired a whole set of land reform laws. Then we had peasant movements, we had Dalit movements, we had women's movements, we had environment protection movements like the Chipko movement by Sundarlal Bahuguna, the movement to save trees, the movement of the backward classes, and the backlash to those movements in the form of the anti-mandal agitation. All of this have shaped the laws and policies of reservations and have had a telling influence in the approach of the judiciary to issues of quotas in education and government jobs. The movements of the past have inspired the events of the present. The tribal revolt led by Birsa Munda in Jharkhand and the Telangana movement of the late 1940s were the inspiration for the formation of the separate states of Jharkhand in 2000 and Telangana in 2014. As I was examining what is it that civil society liberties groups have been doing, I paused to see that there is a group called the Association for Protection of Democratic Rights. It's based in West Bengal and it's been in place since 1972. And this was the time when there was a disillusionment, if you remember, the origins of the Naxal movement and how it began in West Bengal. And this group is active today in protesting against police excesses and excess of repression and suppression. Then we've had, of course, the PUCL. Among the founders of the PUC was Jayaprakash Narayan, Krishan Kant, they were all associated, and Justice Tarkunde. Justice Tarkunde, who also practiced as a senior lawyer in the Supreme Court for many years, was among the founding pillars of the People's Unions for Civil Liberties. Sanjay has referred to many of the PILs filed by PUCL and continue to be filed by PUCL. And I would add to the list that you mentioned, Sanjay, the right to food PI by the PUCL, which is still in court, and that inspired and compelled, in a sense, the state, the parliament first to enact the Right to Food Security Act. Then we've had PUDR, the People's Union for Democratic Rights. What is remarkable about both PUCL and PUDR is they are totally crowd-funded. They made the policy not to accept funds from donors outside of India or even groups within India. Because even within India, we have large corporate donors. But neither PUCL nor PUDR, and I stand corrected if not saying the right thing, as far as I know, don't accept funds from any donor organizations. And they generate their whatever minimal funds to the reports of the fact-finding they conduct and the reports they otherwise publish. Individual contributions. Then we have Common Cause. H.D. Shauri, Arun Shauri's father, who is a retired bureaucrat, started this Common Cause. And again, I think it was not funded by anyone as far as I remember. And on very meager funds and shoestring budgets, I think Sachar handled many cases for them, I have handled many cases for them. And a very modest office and working selflessly day and night. That was Mr. H.D. Shauri. Then we have the India Environment Legal Forum, Action Forum. Then we have, of course, the Narmada Bachao Andolan. Both Sanjay and have handled cases for them. I have handled cases for the Bhopal groups, the Bhopal gas victims groups for many, many years. And I now come back to, again, do cases for them. And then we have the National Association of People's Movements, NAPM. And I've also been fortunate to be able to fight cases for the Safai Karamchari Andolan. You will all recall that we've had a legislation abolishing dry latrines way back in 1993. But like so many legislations, they never got implemented. So in village after village, town after town in India, you would always find dry latrines and you would find man scavengers employed to clean dry latrines. So this litigation, which was as a 32 petition to the Supreme Court, and I would call it as a class action litigation because apart from the Safai Karamchari Andolan, we had individual sanitation workers also as co-petitioners with the Safai Karamchari Andolan. It was a totally researched petition where we gathered facts, photographs, videographs from all over the country And we were shocked to see that there's not a single state in the country which did not have dry latrines and did not have sanitation workers cleaning them. And a majority of those sanitation workers were women. So this litigation culminated in a positive judgment of giving compensation to those who die cleaning sewers, who die doing sanitation work. But a lot needs to be done in terms of rehabilitation of those who are weaned away from sanitation work. And we have the National Campaign for Dignity of Sewer Workers. The work done by these campaigns and the petitions filed by them and argued before the court have led down to positive changes in the law. Then we have in the environmental field, Goa Foundation. We have the Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberties Committee, which did remarkable work in terms of negotiating between the People's War Group and the government of Andhra Pradesh. And they believed in peace and non-violence. They believed in truth and reconciliation. And that is what is remarkable about civil society groups. Most of their approaches have been Gandhi. They're always peaceful, non-violent, and Gandhi. And they work with people and among people. And that is what appeals to many youth in the universities. And that's how they form their early politics in life. So it will be a pity if groups like this are attacked by the state as being anti-national. It would be very unfortunate for this country if we do not allow a kind of accountability to be demanded from the state by the activities of these groups. Then we have Voices Against 377 because there were petitioners before the court. We have the NAS Foundation. And we have many groups working among transgenders and they're doing yeoman service. Many of these groups don't have too much publicity. They're not in the public eye. They're not publishing glossy reports, but they're doing selfless work day after day. And I think we should admire their courage, their persistence, and their competence in being able to handle tough issues which they are faced with. And they always find themselves answerable to the people, accountable to the people. So when you look at the social movements, the civil society movements, and you ask yourself, what has been the relevance of having these movements? One is they've learned to engage with the state, engage with society, and engage at bringing about positive changes. They do it in a variety of forms. For instance, they know how to use the right to information legislation. Many of them you will find that go on, asking questions of departments, of ministries, collating that information, sharing that information, filing petitions on the basis of that information. It's all very tough work. It requires a lot of patience, it requires a lot of diligence, and many of them are at it. And it helps all of us when positive changes happen in the law. If you look at some of the slew of legislations that came out between the years 2004 and 2014, what straightaway comes to mind is statutes that operationalize the right to livelihood, the Manrega Act, statute that operationalized the right to food, the Food Security Act, the Right to Information Act, the Forest Rights Act, the new version of the Land Acquisition Act, the 2013 law. What is remarkable about the 2013 law, it first of all frontally acknowledges the phenomenon of internal displacement as a result of projects. But for, and I would with Sanjay here, make bold to say that, but for the repeated agitation and keeping in the public domain the problems faced by those displaced with the dams in Narmada and displacement elsewhere. I was Chief Justice of Odisha, and I still had petitions coming up before me complaining of non-receipt of compensation for acquisitions for the Hirakud Dam. You look at the Nagarjuna Sagar Dam in Andhra Pradesh, you will still have petitions in the Telangana High Court saying that compensation is yet to be paid for farmers. So this is a story across India, and because of the presence of these civil society movements, these people's movements, I think the Parliament was forced to acknowledge, and therefore in the 2013 legislation, we have something called a social audit. The social impact assessment report has become a very, very important component. Now, earlier these reports were being prepared by a PUDR or by a PUCL or by a People's Tribunal's report. Sanjay has been part of so many of those People's Tribunals, Justice Sachar has been part of so many of those People's Tribunals. They would produce the reports, they would have what we call the subaltern versions, the voices. People would come speak in their own language before a distinguished panel That panel will prepare a report, and very often it happens in this country, the report will be published, presented at a press conference, and then kept for the state, waiting for the state to react to it, which will never happen. But in this period, one saw some positive changes in the law, and somewhere people were made the center of these laws. I could also think of the India Against Corruption movement, which was led by Anna Hazare, but which of course got captured. I'll come to that in a minute. It got captured, and poor Anna Hazare, I think, felt very disillusioned at the end of all of this. What that movement produced was the Lokpal law, and we all are able to see in the last 10 years how that law has really been deprived of any strength. So I'm just saying that these are all what I would call the bottom-up approaches to lawmaking. So civil society groups have played a very, very important role in this bottom-up approach to lawmaking, and this is something that we need to acknowledge, and therefore need to persist with these kinds of efforts and not get disillusioned because of what we find is happening around us in the present. I would also like to now dwell on what Professor Garganella terms as the deliberative democratic practice. So what really happens when these groups go to the court is that state brings out information which otherwise it would not part with. And a kind of a dialogue is fostered in the court, with one position being taken by the civil society actors, one position being taken by the state, and the facilitator being the court. So there is a democratic space that is created where a dialogue can be fostered if the court encourages it. And that is a very, very important process. Very often when we file these PILs, and I'm sure Sanjay also advises his clients, we tell them that this is one more element in your struggle for securing rights for your constituency. It is neither the beginning nor the end. But what purpose it serves is it brings out the positions of the relative actors, facts which otherwise would not be easily accessible, and the attitudes that are out on display. So that deliberative democratic practice is actually played out in some of the BIS that are brought forth to the court by the civil society organizations. And therefore you have a slew of cases that have been fought in the Supreme Court and in the High Courts by these organizations for the people that have helped in bring out more information and greater accountability and transparency than we would have expected of the state otherwise. Because state is always reluctant in opening up its files, its records. We know what is happening with the RTI Act, but this is a fight that must be carried on because we have to utilize whatever tools we may have to their full potential. I also now want to dwell on the kinds of repression the regime is doing it and the earlier regime did not. In fact, this using the FCRA law to deny registrations and licenses started in the UPA regime itself, and it has only been continued in the present day regime. And I must share with all of you that the state as an entity behaves in a very predictable kind of way. If the state is asked to be accountable and answerable, the state will resist. So I am talking of cases that I have fought against the left front government in West Bengal, which had a very bad track record of human rights violations. You had horrible cases of deaths in police custody, violence in police custody, and this is where the left front was in power in West Bengal. Look at Kerala now. There have been cases registered because somebody had an adverse Facebook comment against the chief minister there. Mamata Banerjee, any comment made adversely anywhere can invite it. So across the political spectrum, you find that anyone demanding answerability and accountability will find state against them, either in terms of criminal law action or inquiries or searches and seizures or raids. So one is the FCRA track where you cut out, you close the tap, as they would say, because all these groups are now very conveniently bracketed as anti-national. They are part of a Tukde gang, or they are part of some left liberally. So all these have become, which is why that newspeak becomes very important. Today the word human rights, so if you have a human rights organization, they may deny you a visa. If you're attending a human rights conference, they may deny you a visa. So I'm just saying that there are countries, not just India, even countries abroad that have become hypersensitive and nervous about all these being talked about in public and a public opinion being generated around it. Then you have taxation laws being used. Many of these groups have income tax raids, reopening of assessments. So they are running around in circles between the tax department, between the police, between the ED, between the CBI. So there is a there's a targeting of many of these groups through various forms. And among the youth, and this is something that Justice Sachar would definitely not approve. If you read his autobiography, you could see how a fiery student leader he was. And many of the leaders we see, including the Prime Minister we have, they would not have emerged as leaders had they not been student leaders. They were very active in their student days in politics. Arun Jaitley was a very prominent student leader. Sushma Swaraj was. Lalu Prasad was. Ravi Shankar Prasad was. I'm just saying, name any of the prominent politicians that you can recall. They all emerged from student politics, universities. And today the first clampdown is on universities. And it's not just about the JNU, but universities across India. Today there is an atmosphere of fear, of being not able to speak out and inviting criminal law action if you even held a protest. So 144 is quite liberally used in many of our universities and campuses, and this is something that should cause us concern, because we are going to have a whole generation of youth who have not been introduced to politics. Then how do we expect democratic practices to flourish? How do we expect to create an environment in which we can practice democracy, ask for accountability sensibly? Unless you are able to vote sensibly, you will not be able to elect people, elect leaders who will then be answerable to the public. So across the political spectrum, and I don't single out any one political formation, and including the present government in Delhi now, which doesn't hesitate in getting onto certain platforms just to capture votes. And this is something that is played out right in front of our eyes. And it's very sad spectacle to see that they start off with very high ideals and then become something else. So this is the nature of the political process that we have. This is the nature of the state, which is why it is important for youth and for the youth now working in organizations to engage with the youth, to tell them that this is India's history, this is India's past. These are the leaders that emerged from these movements, and they may have morphed into something else today, but this is where they started. And why it is important, therefore, to practice democracy at that grassroots level, at the student level. Only then we can have people who nurture constitutional values, and definitely of freedom of speech and expression, of thought, of association, of assembly. You list out all those freedoms, it will be meaningless if you do not give space for it and allow democracy to flourish. So what would I expect civil society groups to do? One is for us to remain transparent. When we demand transparency of others, we must be transparent in our practices ourselves. When we demand to know how monies were received, how monies were spent, we must endeavor to do it ourselves. So we must practice that level of transparency and accountability ourselves. How do we engage with opponents? Very often when we organize meetings, we will call people who are like-minded. And today there's a reason for that. You have a meeting organized, you have a fear of somebody coming and disrupting the meeting. But that should not deter you from engaging with your opponents. And which are the examples you look at? You look at Mahatma Gandhi. The way he engaged with his opponents, I don't think anyone had more opposition than he did. The same forces today that are celebrating Nathuram Godse were very much there during Mahatma Gandhi's time, but he knew how to engage with them. We need to take on the difficult task of engaging with our opponents and compelling them to a civil debate. We can't run away from it. Gandhi never ran away from it, and that's why he became what he was. and his values still endure, then we need to be in with the people. What I find with some of our groups is that they don't consult the constituency that they're appearing for in courts. They don't take back to the people the strategies that they're planning in court. So the people get left out and they find that they did not agree to a certain course of action. So this way of engaging the people on a constant basis, speaking the language of the people, that is very important. Like we generate a lot of reports, right? How many of those reports are explained back to the people from whom these reports were generated? How many of those reports are placed in the public domain? How many of those reports are shared amongst each other? So these are the healthy practices as civil society organizations that we need to develop. Sharing of information, putting that information in public domain, sharing of reports and collaborating with each other. We should not become in competition with each other. As long as the competition is healthy, it's fine. If the competition is destructive, it should be avoided. I'm talking typically of PIL space being used by people with opposing public interests. The environmental group opposed to the right to share group. This is a very typical kind of one group against the other that gets played out in the courts and which can easily be avoided. So I think we also hold a mirror to ourselves and ask what are the ways in which we can strengthen the work, where we can inspire the next generation to do better and to keep the focus on protecting democratic values and constitutional values. We must practice these values at our personal level. We must firmly believe in those values. Only then we'll be able to inspire. And this all should not be measured in terms of success and failure. This is a very convenient binary which we should avoid. We should build on the efforts of the past and make sure we step one step at a time further towards the goal of total freedom, total liberty, and total equality. So with that, I think I've covered most of what I wanted to say. I just wanted to end with this poem of Affairs and Affairs. All of you, of course, have heard it so often. देखेंगे अब देखेंगे वो दिन जिसका वादा है जो लोहे अज़ल में लिखा है हम देखेंगे जब जुल्म और सितम के कोहे गरम रुई की तरह उठ जाएंगे हम महकुमों के पांव तले ये धरती धड़ धड़ धड़केगी और ऐले हकम के सर ऊपर जब बिजली कर कर कड़केगी हम देखेंगे थैंक यू
Many thanks, sir, for enlightening the gathering with your remarkable lecture. We all are grateful to hear in-depth insights from the topic.